The mound builders, mound building civilizations of pre-Columbian North America, date back thousands of years to approximately 3500 BC in the Watson Brake archaeological site. Located in Wichita Parish in Louisiana, this is believed to be the very first instance of mound building in North America. Here, 11 earthenwork mounds ranging as high as 7.5 meters and 270 meters in diameter were constructed as both dwelling platforms and as burial sites by a so-called hunter-gatherer society. The Watson Brake site is representative of the archaic period of mound building civilizations in the region stretching from the Midwest to states like Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, Arkansas, Ohio, Oklahoma, and as far east as Georgia. It is also noteworthy for predating the constructions to that of the Great Pyramids of Giza. Over the next 5,000 years, the Watson Brake site would be peopled by numerous mound building civilizations, periods of which are roughly divided as the Archaic period, the Woodland period, and the Mississippian Culture. Within these broad periods, there are numerous subcategories. For instance, the Coles Creek culture flourished in the lower Mississippi Valley from the tail end of the Woodland period through much of the Mississippian culture. Easily the most accomplished of these mound building civilizations emerged during the latter period, the Mississippian culture, which we will explore in some depth in this video before looking closely at a number of the most significant centers of mound building in pre-Columbian North America, specifically Cahokia and Illinois, the Caddo Indians and their mound building sites in the Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma region, the Etowah Indians in Georgia, and the Natchez Indians in Mississippi. The latter, the Natchez, are responsible for the erection of the Emerald Mound. All of these cultures flourished in the 8th centuries between 800 AD and 1600 AD, a period roughly continuous with the Mid Ages in European history. The Mississippian culture flourished in the region running from Texas and Oklahoma east as far as Georgia between approximately 800 AD and 1600 AD. This was a loose cultural grouping of different Native American peoples, such as the Caddo and the Natchez Indians, as well as forerunners of the Shawnee, Cherokee, and other Algonquin Indians. As such, these were not ethnically homogeneous people, but were tied together by a number of common features to this society. For instance, these Indian peoples had similar types of dress and diet, while their agriculture was heavily centered on maize production. As a staple, it also incorporated in squash. Moreover, these Mississippian culture peoples and places as diverse as eastern Texas, southern Illinois, and western Georgia had similar religious systems. While technologically, each people had developed to a similar state with common types of pottery, tools, and weapons being used across a vast swath of land from Texas eastwards to the Atlantic Ocean. The Mississippian culture was notable for its many people being mound-building people. Between the 9th and 7th centuries, major settlements appeared across North America centered on large pyramid-like mounds, some of which were the size of towns. One of the earliest and greatest accomplishments of the Mississippian culture was the erection of Mound near modern-day Collinsville in Illinois. This was constructed in the first half of the 10th century AD. It is effectively a pyramid, much like the Egyptians built or the Mayas erected in Central America. However, instead of using stone blocks as occurred in Egypt and in Central America, vast earthen sods were layered together to construct these North American pyramids. In ancient times, wooden stairs were employed to allow people to climb up these earthen mounds. the largest of which at Cahokia stood approximately 30 meters tall and measured 290 meters by 236 meters at the base. This means Monk's Mound at Cahokia is of a comparable size to the Great Pyramid in Giza, which was constructed 2600 BC and the only surviving wonder of the ancient world. The exact purpose of Monk's Mound is still unclear, though it was most likely used as a ritual site for religious and spiritual ceremonies at burials. More broadly, the emergence of the town of Cahokia was considerable enough by the late 18th century that some archaeologists have estimated its population to have expanded to approximately 15,000 people living there at one time. While Cahokia was emerging in Illinois, another major center of mound building was developing amongst the Caddo Indians, much further to the south. The Caddo Indians dominated a large array of land in what is now East Texas, much of Oklahoma, and western Louisiana throughout the Mississippian culture between 800 AD and 1400 AD. This Caddo culture exhibited many of the common characteristics of the Mississippian culture, and that their agriculture depended primarily on maize farming as a staple. It had sophisticated pottery methods and engaged in mound building. One of the most significant mound building sites amongst the Caddo Indians is to be found at Spiro Mounds near the Arkansas River in what is now southeastern Oklahoma. This site includes 12 large earthen mounds spread out over 150 acres of land. As with the Native American Indian cultures at Cahokia, or those we will look at shortly at Etowah in Georgia, or in Emerald Mound site in Mississippi, these were built for a broad array of uses. Some of the mounds were used for residential purposes for local Caddo chiefs, and others are prominent members of the local Indian society, while others were utilized for economic activity. A plaza existed between the mounds where economic activity was engaged in. There is one more major mound at Spiro, one which is variously termed the Spiro Mound or Craig's Mound. A large chamber has been excavated here, one which contained a wide array of ornate wooden funerary objects, copper specimens, and other valuable burial ornaments, such that this has been assessed by some as being the American mound building civilization equivalent to King Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt. One of the most sophisticated settlements built anywhere by the Indians of the Mississippi culture was that which was located far to the east of the Caddo Indians. This lies adjacent to the Etowah River near what is now the town of Cartersville in Georgia. Beginning around 1000 AD, the Etowah Indians began developing a site here, which eventually expanded to over more than 50 acres of land by the 15th century. It was erected on the site of a previous settlement of the Woodland period. But the Etowah Indian settlement here became much more significant, and the Indians of Etowah exercised considerable control over much of the Georgia region. Eventually, Etowah consisted of 3 main platform mounds on which a wide array of buildings were constructed across the centuries. For example, the Chief's Mound, or Mound A, stood nearly 20 meters high, the equivalent of a 6-story building today, and archaeologists have identified the remains of as many as 140 different buildings across the mound. These would have included houses, temples, and other buildings for religious, spiritual, and political figures within the community of Etowah. Mound B appears to have primarily been a religious center, while Mound C was a burial site. Similar mounds were erected around these, and a plaza ran around the main mounds at a lower level. Here, commercial and economic activities were carried out, as well as recreational games such as stickball, baseball, indigenous games, similar to lacrosse. There were also defensive structures erected around the main mounds at Etowah, an indication that the Indians here were engaged in a prolonged conflict with the Native American Indians of Moundville to the west in Alabama for control over the Alabama River Basin. These outer fortifications were surrounded by palisades and guard towers from which archers would have been able to shoot at approaching armies. Indicates a considerable level of sophistication in the settlement here at Etowah. Of all of the major centers of the Mississippian culture, those of the Natchez Indians were the last to continue to flourish before the mound building civilizations of American Midwest completely succumbed and were effectively destroyed by the westward expansion of the United States. The Natchez Indians succeeded the Cahokia culture, which had existed along the course of the Mississippi River in what is now Mississippi proper from 1200 AD onwards. These people exhibited most of the same cultural facets as the Native American Indian cultures, which had begun to develop at sites like Cahokia, Etowah, and Spiro Mounds. The most acclaimed center of Natchez Indian development and mound building occurred at the Emerald Mound site, near what is now Staunton, Mississippi. Like most other major mound building sites, this was developed gradually over a period of several centuries as the regional power of the Natchez Indians had expanded. Thus, the Emerald Mound site was still in development and as late as 1700 AD. By the time it was at its most complete, the central mound had grown to a size of over 10 meters high and was approximately 230 meters wide, making it the second largest earthwork mound constructed by the Mississippian culture in North America, second to only Monk's Mound at Cahokia in northern Illinois. The mound was erected using the natural hill at the site, where the grass surrounding it is of a particular shade of emerald green, thus the name Emerald Mound. Like other sites at places such as Etowah, the Emerald Mound site combined a wide range of uses, including the dwelling space of local rulers, religious buildings, and burial sites. Curiously though, unlike sites such as Etowah, which were only fully abandoned by the local Indian people when the encroachment of white people of European descent pushed them westward, the Emerald Mound site appears to have been largely abandoned around the middle of the 18th century. The Emerald Mound site represents the last significant flowering of the Mississippian culture and indeed of the mound building civilizations of North America. The 16th century saw a number of crises strike the American Indian societies which existed between Texas and Oklahoma in the west, all the way from Georgia to the east and north to Ohio and Illinois. Firstly, the region was increasingly impacted by the so-called Little Ice Age, a period between the 13th and 17th centuries, which saw world temperatures decline by as much as 2 degrees on average. The most intense period of this Little Ice Age occurred in the 16th and 17th centuries. This triggered famines and death in places throughout North America, and in turn led to political instability, wars, and societal decline. To compound matters, this was right around the time the first Europeans began to establish settlements along the east coast of North America. The British, the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch colonies established from Florida all the way north to Newfoundland and Canada did not immediately impact on the Mississippian culture, but gradually the Algonquin Indians and other Native American Indians who lived closer to the Atlantic seaboard were pushed westward by the Europeans. By the late 17th century, as the natives of the East Coast headed west of the Appalachian Mountains, they began to exert greater pressure on the people of the Mississippian culture. By the 18th century, as more and more groups such as the Cherokee and the Shawnee were pushed westward, the mound-building civilizations of the Mississippi Valley and the Midwest went into terminal decline. The last were generally removed in the early 19th century as resources were identified in key locations. For instance, the Cherokee and other Indians who lived in and around Etowah and Georgia were not finally removed until the discovery of gold mines in the vicinity in the 1810s and 1820s. The Caddo Indians of the Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma region were eventually removed to a reservation in western Texas in the late 1850s. However, despite the destruction of the culture of the mound building civilization here in North America, despite the destruction of the culture of the mound building civilizations of North America, archaeological studies and historical reassessments over the last several decades have once again established exactly how sophisticated these people were.